People always want to say they could want it to dry age at home, but they don't have the right circumstances. And it is better to do it in a controlled environment when you're going for like longer terms of dry aging, when you're looking into 2 or 3 months of dry aging, into weeks. But when you're going for a couple days, this is going to enhance the flavor of your meat and as well give you that nice crust on the outside. So what I'm going to show you today is how to get the ultimate sear on your steak. We let the steak rest at room temperature. We call it this tempering. 30 minutes before we actually cook the steak. This allows the internal temperature of the steak to match the external temperature of the steak. So when we cook it in that high heat, the temperature gradient won't be so different. And you'll notice some steaks that aren't properly tempered, there'll be a large difference in the color once you slice it. So every time when you slice a steak, you let it rest, right? Let it rest for about the same amount of time that you cook it for. That is the rule, right? You want to let the steak rest for as long as it takes to cook. Once you slice your steak, you're going to want to cut against the grain. And what this means is if you look in the steak and you see these short textures, these short lines, then that is against the grain. If you see long lines going throughout the steak, then you cut the wrong way. So let's look how easy this tears. Now let's take a look at the steak here, guys. You know, you see this nice medium rare texture of that pink meat. And on the outside, you see this crust start to form, and that sear on the outside that we got from the Maillard reaction, from drying out the meat, just was able to form this crust that is almost about 1/8 of an inch thick, and that's all gonna be crispy. So every time you slice your steak, you're gonna want to season that open flesh with a little bit of salt. That's a restaurant secret. Every time you go to a restaurant, we sear heavily, we season heavily on the outside of the steak when we sear, and as well as when we slice the steak, we add a little bit of salt on the outside just to flavor the meat and bring it to the next level. Restaurant secrets. And what we did is we just air dried it in our fridge for 4 days. So you'll notice how much has changed over 4 days time. And the best way to do it is put it on a rack inside your cooler or inside your refrigerator, and make sure there's plenty of space around so air can circulate throughout. And while the air is circulating throughout, it's going to dry out your steak, so you'll get a really nice sear on it. As the moisture is going to leave the steak, and it's actually going to concentrate the flavor of your steak. And then you're left with a drier surface area on your piece of meat. So when you go to sear it, you'll be able to get a nice thick crust on that piece of meat. So let's take a look at our steak. From day one, you can see it's nice, it's red, it's like feels really soft, it's really tender, and it looks really moist on the exterior of the steak. So we're going to throw that into the refrigerator for 1 day. After 1 day in the refrigerator, we're going to take a look at it and look at it again. See, it's still a nice red color. It's getting darker as we look at it, and we see these dark areas start to form around, and we see a little bit less of that shiny gloss on the outside of the tenderloin. And on the 3rd day, we take a look at that tenderloin, and it's going to be a really dark red color. And this is kind of what we're looking for. We want it to be like really concentrating the flavor. That means a lot of the moisture has left the steak, and it's going to start to concentrate the flavor, and we're going to get a nice dry surface area so that when we do sear it, there won't be any moisture in the way to inhibit some kind of steam to prevent that Maillard reaction. Maillard reaction is a caramelization of proteins that's going to make that crust nice and thick and give it that nice flavor umami built onto your steak. Now we look on to day 4. Day 4, you can see here, the color is completely changed, right? It's no longer that deep red color. It's not that bright red color. And you might look at this and be like, oh man, that looks terrible. But there's no smell coming through the steak. If you look at it, it's a lot more dense than what it was before. And that's because the moisture is left and the meat is starting to contract and hold in the moisture from within. And also the flavors are going to be bonding closer together. So if you look at this steak versus before, you see I can still push it. There's still moisture in there, but it holds that shape in there a little more than the first couple days. And so every day when you leave this in your cooler, you want to go back and flip it over every day so that different areas can dry. Like if you can see this side is really nice and dark, and it's really nice and dry. We're going to get a really nice sear on this piece of steak right here. And there's no sticky texture. There's no slime, no anything growing on because of constant rotation in your fridge. You want to make sure your fridge has nice air space where you can air it out. That's how we sear the steak. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Stay happy, stay hungry, feed your soul, feed your mind, and tune in next week when we post some more videos on how we cook. Thanks for tuning in. See you guys next week.